All right. I think we're live. Not sure. I had to. The setup seemed to change. I don't know why. There was more steps involved getting to this live stream than previously. I don't know if YouTube is fiddling with fiddling with the way. I I've had enough of the transitions, the different one of excuse me. One of the things I dislike about YouTube is the arbitrariness, not only of monitoring content, but the way they introduce changes to the website itself. And I and it'll be interesting to see if any of these alt tech sites crop up that are actual competitors, not in the sense of cutting into their market share, because I don't think any YouTube is Google. YouTube is basically a monopoly, but uh, if some of these can actually become like sustainable alternatives, where people who have been involuntarily exiled or been forced to leave, where they can actually set up their own channels and upload content that's verboten over here on YouTube. I know a lot of more prominent channels have actually tried this out. David Wood, for example, from Act 17 Apologetics, he's been promoting Rumble a lot. Now, I haven't actually used Rumble. I don't even know if I've been to their website, but it seems to be a better alternative than some of these other alt tech sites that have been ceaselessly promoted by conservatives and the right. BitChute, this is one of the, and I did a video about this, but one of the issues I have with with conservatives who are trying to find an alternative to the big social media monopolies that have been established, and that what one of the problems I have is they promote things like they promote their alternatives are of vastly inferior quality, and yet they still promote them because they see them as the way of, or they see it as a means of lessening the grip YouTube has on the public. Because right now, if you want to see video content and streaming content, you basically go to YouTube. I mean, there are other sites. There's LiveLeak, for example, or Vimeo, but YouTube really is the only large video sharing platform, and it makes some people so it it drives them up a wall. It makes them so mad they want to search for search for an alternative, which is good, because you do need to find yourself an alternative, considering how much speech is being restricted, how much the Overton window is being pushed, where where you can't even express normal previous heretofore mainstream opinions, like women, for example. You can't even express them online without being deplatformed. So I can understand the desire to find an alternative, but the problem is when you promote alternatives that are of such shoddy quality and that don't really serve the intended purpose, which is communicating with the public, getting your ideas across in a tangible way. When you do that, you lose credibility, and it just makes people even more wedded to these mottos that are restrictive, that are silencing your voice. So, I mean that's the main issue I have with people who promoting things like BitChute, which are just terrible on every conceivable level in terms of the interface, the content. Largely, they're just terrible alternatives to the status quo. And so I'm happy to see that there are other sites cropping up that are legitimate alternatives. Things like Rumble, Odyssey. I actually have watched some videos on Odyssey from people like iHypocrite who have yet to be deplatformed from YouTube and other social media platforms. But I've watched some videos there, and Odyssey as well seems to be a very worthwhile site. It seems to be, again, I don't think any of these sites are going to necessarily replace YouTube. I don't foresee that happening anytime in the near future. But the fact that they exist, the fact that the quality is very, very close to what you would find on a site like this is an encouragement. It actually, things like those sites actually do encourage people searching for an alternative to build on and invest. And Locals is another one, the Dave Rubin site. I haven't. I've visited different Locals. I haven't actually used it because I think a lot of Locals. The problem with that is a lot of the content. It's largely a subscription based model, um, which is not bad in and of itself. It's not a bad idea, but I think a lot of people are searching for something along the lines of YouTube where you can access free content. Hi, GW. Free content that has been censored by platforms like YouTube, uh, Google, YouTube. So I think people are looking for that. But the fact that these websites exist. Okay. I thought you were going to say this. When I started reading that and said sound is off, I thought I'd have to. I thought I was having another technical malfunction, but yeah, you can listen to it later. But the fact that these alternatives exist and that they're actually reputable, that they're functional, that's the big thing. A lot of these non mainstream, non progressive alternatives don't meet the basic test of functionality. And I understand the counter argument there that these platforms are constantly being harassed. They themselves are being deplatformed. Most of you recall what happened with Parler, the fact that they were kicked off of the App Store, and that the people who control these monopolies, they're not going to allow competitors, regardless of how little a threat they pose to the profitability of these companies. I mean, Google is not going to go out of business if there is a non-leftist video sharing site that's an alternative to YouTube. It's still going to be one of the most profitable corporations on the planet. But the threat, they view themselves not only as businesses, as trying to increase the profit margin. They view themselves as incipient rulers. They really, when you when you think of people like Sergey Brin or Tim Cook or Sundar Pinchar, I'm probably mispronouncing his name, but when you look at these people, they view themselves as de facto legislators who they want to control. Zuckerberg is another one who actually is planning a run for president. Uh, as hard as that is to believe, there's someone who has the people skills of a reptile. He, but all these people look at themselves as de facto lawmakers. So it's not just that these small, seemingly inconsequential websites, which are alternatives, it's not that they pose a threat to their business model. It's that they, by introducing a contrary point of view, they pose a threat to to the ideology or the philosophy they want to impose upon the rest. Acceptable, when the the government is threatened by an alternative. And the perfect illustration of this is Lysander Spooner. When he established an alternative to the postal service, a mail carrying service, it was a private mail carrier, mail delivery service. It was so successful that the government actually shut it down. Now, and so they look at it as the perspective from the perspective of a state, a government that sees anything, any 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 model that's established in opposition to them, or not even in opposition, but as an alternative. They see that as an existential threat. You know, uh, people are actually allowed to think for themselves and communicate freely. They see that as the beginning of a beginning of a movement to delegitimize their worldview. Tech, this techno utopian worldview where people are not allowed to express dissent over open borders, the importation of millions of workers to replace current workers. Um, Things like I mentioned trans ideology and LGBT dogma. Anything that questions these values, they view as an existential threat, which is why you see them going after things like Parler or Gab. And I'm not a fan of Gab, but but the reason they go after these platforms, despite the fact that they pose no real threat to their profitability or their existence financially. Hi, Alejandro, is because they serve as a threat to their philosophy. The fact that they're questioning the way that they do things. Matt, a few years ago, uh, which was basically it was a bit of a polemic, but also a history of Gen X and millennials and their relationship to the current environment. These were I I think he called Gen X, and this is a phrase he borrowed from another um, sociologist. I think he called them digital nomads, and millennials and Gen Z are digital natives. And he actually had an interesting chapter in that book where he describes the reasoning behind uh, the reasoning behind a lot of these tech monopolies and they the way they view things. They view anything which poses questions to their way of operating, whether that's Apple invasively screening your photos of your children for find uh, pictures, illicit pictures of children that violate the federal law. They inventing a pretext to basically invade your privacy. That's what they're doing, and the backlash that resulted to this proposal was it completely dumbfounded Tim Cook and his subordinates. They did not expect so much of a backlash because, and Hennessy explains this in the book, a certain generation has complacently accepted the invasion of their privacy and the fact that they're being data mined for profit for these multinational corporations. Hi, Jonathan. A certain generation has accepted that as the cost of doing business, as the cost of having great um, all of these fascinating, really entertaining gadgets, things like Alexa or Google, things like Alexa or Echo, these little personal home devices that essentially soak up information and serve as the NSA within your home, in in um in a little digital box or cube. It's basically soaking up all of your personal information and relaying that to either corporate headquarters or um, third party marketers or to the the federal government. And Hennessy points out the fact that that this generation has accepted this fundamental reordering of uh, of of your relationship to, say, constitutional rights or civil liberties, and how you relate to these rights. You've essentially ceded them to these high tech corporate behemoths in return for next in return for a drone delivering items to your apartment or your house. And the book, even though it has its flaws, I think Hennessy still makes a pretty compelling argument that there's reason to resist this, in spite of the fact that there's already so much encroachment that's been done into our daily lives. There's reason to stand back, and his argument is basically that Generation X, since they weren't weaned in this environment, they should be the ones to resist, to stand up against this. But that's the type of thing. That's the type of thing that. Oh yeah. The book is by Matthew Hennessy. It's let me look at the title. Just let me find the title. Yeah, 0 Hour for Gen X. Uh, that's the title of the book. How the last adult generation can save America from the millennials. And like I said, it has some flaws, but it's it's actually a pretty good book. It's a little under 200 pages, about 130, 150 pages long. And um, that's the type of thing. basically scanning through personal family photo albums to supposedly find illegal material. That's the type of thing that these companies expect you not to blanch at, and uh, and that's the reason why they are so hostile to any alternative to them. It's and I think the phrase Hennessy uses in his book is the and it's not it's I don't think it's a panopticon. It's not but it's not the um it was let me my memory so bad. But the phrase he that's basically um something that would entail a completely insular community where you buy all of your goods from the same source. You communicate with your friends or loved ones using the same source. Basically, you have one or two or three major corporations that are responsible for feeding you, clothing you, distributing any reading materials that you might need, and basically you're captive to this elect group of tech entrepreneurs. People like Zuckerberg and Pinchal. I don't know how to pronounce the name of the Indian CEO of Google, but you're basically beholden to these people for the rest of your life. And anything that inserts itself into that monopoly or tries to uh, offer you the alternative of not having your children's photos distributed by uh, creepy Silicon Valley executives, that needs to be crushed. Uh, so I actually do think that these newer, more hopefully more technically appealing alternatives. I hope they do get off the ground. We'll see about that, but something needs to happen. Uh, anyway, there's a bit of a meandering live stream, but I will see all of you hopefully very soon. I don't know the next time I'll upload, but I'll see you then.